Hi, everyone. We'll just wait a couple more minutes so everyone can hop on to our call. Good evening, Fisher. How are you? Good. I'm glad. Yay. And I'm so excited to see Kavita and Sophie joining us. Hello there. How are you? You're muted.
There you go. Lots of times we discover we're just talking to ourselves. I've had a long day of meetings, and sometimes you just need to be reminded you're on mute. How's everyone doing?
Good.
Good.
I'm so excited to have both of you here. Hi, Sophie. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
I'm
Good
so
to see
good.
you.
I'm so excited.
Yeah, me
Are you
too.
able to hear me okay, Camilla?
Yes,
All right.
very loud and clear. Thank you. So let's just wait just one more minute to let people join our call, and then we can start. Okay. Hi, everyone. Good evening. First of all, I just wanted to introduce you all to Kavita and Sophie that are here today with us to talk about things, to talk about solutions, and to inspire us all. So I just wanted to start with a round of how everyone's doing. And as usual, you could put a word of the day in the chat or the emoji of the day. So just tell us how you're feeling in the chat. I'll put mine in. Great. I love these. Yeah. Okay, awesome. So Andrea, I'm gonna give you the word because I heard that you have really great news for the DC folks.
Yes, so I just wanted to talk to all the folks that are in the UDC contingent. The abstract that I submitted yesterday for Research Week was accepted. And so you guys will be presenting on the data challenge at Research Week. So congratulations. I have some ideas about how to do that. And so it's a PowerPoint presentation. And so we will be looking at the process and the solutions that you come up with. So congratulations, all of you hardworking folks on the UDC team.
Yes, congratulations, guys. So yeah, let's start our day today. So thank you all again for joining. And we have, as I said, two amazing guest speakers that I'm gonna read their bios, and then I'm gonna hand in the word to Kavita and then to Sophie, and then we're gonna have some Q&A. Okay, so let me open it up. So starting with Kavita is a technology leader, principal technical program manager, and a Microsoft veteran of 14 years. She has 20 years of experience in driving innovation capabilities in the product and program management roles in high-tech industry. Kavita has led several key leadership initiatives on STEM, DigiGirls, and Women's Diversity and Inclusion. She was recognized as the 2020 Women in Tech Award by Aragon Research for her outstanding work in product operations and innovation. In 2019, 2021, she empowered and inspired women technology as a speaker panelist for C-level senior leaders and emerging leaders at the Grace Hopper Conference at an event attended by 30,000 attendees globally. She was also a speaker at the highest rated Lightning Talk session and in the VWare organized Women Transforming Technology event in 2020, as well as part executive committee for the last couple of years. She's a proud mom of a teenage son, and in her spare time enjoys coaching on robotics, traveling, and music. So welcome. Thank you so much, Kavita, for being here. And Sophie. So Sophie Sandberg is an activist and street artist combating gender-based violence. She created the popular initiative Catcalls of NYC, which raises awareness about street harassment using colorful chalk art, and co-leads Chalkback, a global youth-led movement against street harassment. She has a Bachelor's of Arts from the New York University in Gender and Sexuality Studies. At the age of 19, Sophie started Catcalls of NYC, inspired by her own experiences of street harassment growing up in New York. Frustrated by the behavior, she began to write verbatim phrases of harassment on the streets with chalk to encourage awareness and dialogue. Since starting Catcalls of NYC in 2016, she has reached 100,000 of people on social media. Her work has inspired the international youth-led movement Chalkback, consisting of 200 Catcalls of sites spanning in 6 continents, run by young activists. So yeah, thank you both so much. You're both so amazing. So I'm gonna give up the word to Kavita because I know she has a great presentation to share with us. So Kavita, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Camila. And it's such a pleasure to meet all of you. And Camila has shared some of your, great backgrounds. And I know that you'll come from very diverse backgrounds, which is very exciting. So I am hoping that my presentation is as exciting as your diverse backgrounds. Of course, as you listen to me and you might have questions, we will have some time, I think, towards the end of the presentation to ask questions. So I would encourage you to ask questions. Okay, so let me share my screen. Okay. All right. Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
All right. All right. So the topic that I chose for today's presentation was the power of data and storytelling. We often, talk about how to present data, how to talk about insights, but the one most powerful thing which I have found is that when you can relate it in a story, it becomes so much more powerful and empowering, right? It includes the key message that you want to convey to your audience, right? So how do you do that, right? And going to my next slide, this is where I wanted to kind of share how best to talk about a story, right? It even is more appealing when you are sharing your own experience. For example, here is the story of Gia, right? When she was a little girl, and I kind of relate to Gia's story as a little girl, but I wanted to, portray Gia here. She had a lot of fascination for books. And she would dream about these things, right? And she would think about, oh my God, I dream about these things. Where can I find my answers, right? Who likes these kind of books that I read? I want to know, maybe I want to make friends with them, right? And then where can I find out more, right? And her fascination for books led to, going to the library, right? Spending a lot of time in the library. And this is how, you connect the dots about how you're telling your own story or someone else's story, and then talking about what data represents, right? And how you can bring that data into life by relating your own experiences, right? So I'll pause there and move on to the next slide. So this is where, I'm sure with the investigations that you all did, you all have gathered a lot of data, right? Now, when you are representing that data, think about very common English questions, right? Just as in the previous slide, you were depicting the story of Jia, right? She was having all these questions, and also about what was she trying to figure? What was she trying to find out? And what was the key thing that she was going after? And likewise, this is about, readership in Seattle, right? And the reason why I wanted to bring this up is, there was a lot of study that was done, and also Power BI, which is a Microsoft application and tool that can represent data in many different ways. So it's all about also visualizing, right? So this was about readership in Seattle, just like Jia had these questions about who reads my kind of books, right? And how do you sort of show insights from the data is how, you frame up maybe a dashboard, right? Maybe specific areas where you want to visualize the data. Like this particular one talks about on the left side about how many people are even, reading books. And, this is about, I think, King County Library System, right? How many users are there? How many different genres of books are there? And then what kind of categories of books are there? So when you start telling a story like that, the data, seems to be very seamless in terms of how you're representing your data, right? It doesn't become boring, but it's very exciting to know, oh, wow, Jia had all these questions. So let me represent in a very powerful visual way how to represent the data. Now, here are some tips for you in terms of when you are working towards storytelling with your data. Key things to keep in mind is build a compelling narrative, maybe associate it with your own personal experience, or tell someone else's story. Typically, you will find that in all your data, there is always people and personas, right? So pick up someone and pick up maybe a group of people and tell their story, right? Then it becomes more powerful. So build a compelling narrative, right? Support a strong message. If you try to put too many messages, it's confusing. So pick on the top 1 or 2 key messaging that you want to convey to your audience, right? And also understand your audience, who you're wanting to speak to and who is the message for. Help, if it is for a business, help businesses learn about, let's say, the audience, right? In this case, for example, Jia had all these questions, right? So how will you show all of that through data, through reports, through visuals, through insights, right? Show gaps in the data, right? What is missing? What is causing risk, right? And provide credibility by showing accurate data, right? So the key takeaway here is, you want to create that compelling narrative and do the storytelling. All right. Moving on to the next slide, building value with your data story. Sometimes you can gather a lot of data, but it is really missing the key value piece, right? in this story, for example, this is a dashboard, right? And Power BI has very many powerful features in which you can show, for example, pie charts, right? The dials, as you can see. And also sometimes, the audience or leaders just want to see the big numbers, right? And that is where on the left side, you're seeing the 41 million, the 493K. When you want to jazz up your audience with those numbers, you want to portray it that way, right? And then at the bottom part of the slide is a breakdown of your story, right? It's like those nuggets where you are showing what trend is growing, or on a time scale, right? How are things progressing? So many different parts of the story, right? In terms of building the value, you want to start with a hypothesis, right? Maybe you can come up with, what is your theory, right? What are you trying to prove, right? And collect the data. Sometimes you collect less data, sometimes you collect more data, but then when you have your hypothesis, it helps you focus, right? And then never forget the key message, because it's very easy to get lost, right? Oftentimes, when I see a lot of reports in our meetings, I'm like, oh my God, it's so confusing, right? So try to have one key takeaway at the bottom, or the key message, right? Just call it out. This is the key message, right? So that makes it more powerful as to what are you trying to convey in that slide, right? And ask questions, right? Sometimes you want to emphasize by asking questions, and also a call to action, right? You always want the audience to take some action, so call to action. All right. So this is a dashboard representation, and then we move on to a lot of the data becomes exciting when you try to make it more interactive, right? So the red arrows in the slide represent how you can make the user interact with the data, right? So the user filters, right? On the first, the top left corner, you can filter based on your interest, or if you want to click down, right? There's also toggles, right, that you can use, or maybe there's a slider where you can move things up and down, and also different types of interactions. There's also call to action in terms of social media share on the top right corner, if you can see, right? So all of this makes it very interactive, and also these are kind of the key elements of a data story. Build your narrative, use visuals to enlighten, show data to support, and drive call to action, right? And with that, I come to my last slide, in which, there are many different examples that you can find in this link that you have below. And I will share this deck with Camilla to be shared with all of you. Microsoft has very powerful Power BI resource in which you can see hundreds of such different examples, right? This, the top left is, for example, for cancer analytics, right? This was built by, just it's crowdsourcing, right? Someone who has access to the Power BI tool, they were passionate about cancer, doing analysis on cancer treatment, and, they came up with this. The second one is some sort of airport authority. Yeah, airport authority performance. Superstores on the bottom left. The reason why I put this together is to illustrate again the different ways in which the data has been represented. All right. So with that, I come to the end of my presentation. Hopefully, this helped all of you to just get some key nuggets. I know each one of you is really, very experienced in your respective areas, and I can learn a lot from you. But this is kind of how I think you can make use of Power BI and do a powerful, compelling storytelling. Thank you.
Thank you, Kavita. Thank you so much for your presentation. I just love the way that you structured it. And I think if we're talking about storytelling, I think that's a really nice segue to Sophie. And Sophie, I will invite you now to talk about how you do storytelling and how do you, yeah, just use that powerful tool to fight against street harassment. So, yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kavita, for that presentation. It was so interesting and I learned a lot myself. And thank you, Camilla, too, for inviting me. So hi, nice to meet you all. I'm Sophie Sandberg. Like Camilla said, I'm a street artist and activist. So I don't deal a lot with data, but I do deal a lot with kind of firsthand storytelling. And I'm really excited to tell you all kind of my story and my experience of starting to advocate against the issue of street harassment. So I'm going to share my screen. All right. Let's see. All right, can everyone see the presentation? It says loading. Okay, there we go. So yeah, I'm going to tell you all a little bit about Catcalls of NYC, what it is as a solution for street harassment, and what it means to chalk back against harassment. So what is Catcalls of NYC to start? Catcalls of NYC is an initiative that uses colorful chalk art to raise awareness about street harassment. So we actually write the word for word phrases of harassment on the streets where they happen to inspire dialogue, to share people's stories, and really to stop passersby in a bold and colorful way. So Catcalls of NYC was really inspired by my own personal experience, which I think is, just like Kavita was saying, it's a good point to look to your own experiences and those close to you to think about these solutions and what you need. So for me, what was missing when I was growing up in New York was a way to raise awareness and address street harassment. I started getting harassed on the streets when I was a teenager, when I was a really young teenager. And these older men would make comments about my body, how I looked, and I felt so deeply uncomfortable. And I didn't know how to respond. So when I got a little older and I was a college student, I decided to start actually documenting all of these experiences that I'd had, and then writing them down on the streets with chalk. And a lot of this was really in response to the conversations I was having with people. So a lot of people downplayed the issue of street harassment. They would say it's just words, it's no big deal, and maybe even say it's a compliment or it's a form of flirting. So I wanted to use the colorful chalk and the word for word phrases to show people exactly what the impact of hearing something like this on the street would be. Even though they weren't hearing it, by actually seeing the words, they could understand how harmful and impactful and scary, and what feelings might arise from a comment like this. So in addition to writing the words down on the street, I also post on social media. And that's a really important part of the solution as well. So the colorful chalk art is just one aspect. That's where we engage passersby and maybe people who wouldn't be interested in feminism. But then on Instagram, we're able to engage people who are looking to talk about street harassment and really want to be in a community around this issue. So as you can see, the Catcalls of NYC Instagram now has about 160,000 followers. And this is a really amazing part of the initiative because that's where people message in and write about their experiences with street harassment. We get like 10 submissions each day from people who want to share their stories, talk about what's happened to them. And we take those submissions and then we write them on the street and then we post them on Instagram. So it's this cycle of listening to people's stories, giving support, and then writing them in public space, posting them on Instagram, and then engaging our community further. So that's how that process works. One other thing to note about Catcalls of NYC is that it's also inspired a global movement. So a few years into running Catcalls of NYC, it started to gain traction on Instagram, and people from around the world started noticing the initiative and asking if they could bring it to their city. So this is just one example from Catcalls of London. There are so many different catcall accounts all around the world. There's one in Amsterdam. Just to briefly show you a few of the people who have been inspired to start their own catcalls initiative based on Catcalls of NYC. So once again, it really shows how useful social media can be to spread a message and engage people on this issue. So now we make up Chalkback. Chalkback is the global movement of all of the different catcall accounts around the world. And the bio is a little outdated. It's now up to 600 people all around the world who are using Chalk to raise awareness. And in addition to, just creating this chalk art and posting on social media, we also have public events where we gather people to write their own story and come together in a public space. That's been a little more difficult during COVID, but luckily it's pretty socially distanced. And yeah, we also are this big community. So we're able to support each other and encourage each other to continue raising awareness about street harassment and advocating against this problem. So I would say the main takeaways in terms of the impact of Chalkback on street harassment are, one, the sense of community and solidarity. People facing harassment in public space need to have a sense of community and support, because that's hard to find just generally outside of these spaces. And then two, the solution is an educational solution. So we're able to show people who might not experience harassment that this behavior is happening, it's not okay, and there are ways that they can learn about it and get involved in solutions. So yeah, that is like the overarching Catcalls of NYC and Chalkback movement. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Here's my email, Instagram, LinkedIn, all of that. And yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Incredible. Thank you. Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Kavita. I'm just really inspired by both of you. And let me spotlight both of you here. And I wanted to ask a question, and then I'm gonna open up the floor to any other questions that the participants might have. So a little background. So all of this amazing participants here have been collecting data and looking at the problem. And now this week, we're going to look further into solutions. So I think my question for you is, what advice would you give them, and how they can approach that problem, and how can then transform that into solutions? So yeah, I'm asking that for both of you. So if anyone would like to respond.
Sure, I can give it a shot. So my advice to each one of you is that I think, don't get overwhelmed with the data that you have, right? It might look really scary to see all that data and how to parse through. But I think, keeping aside all kinds of tools and technology, right? I would just ask simple English questions. Right? I would just start with, what am I trying to find? Right? Who am I trying to find for? Right? Where do I look for it? Right? When you really write down these simple English questions, all of a sudden, the data becomes a very supportive thing for you to just construct around these questions. And then, you can leverage, once you read those English questions, you kind of get to, okay, how can I pull data to address these questions? It becomes simpler. So you want to break down the problem always, right? Break it down to smaller bite size that you can understand what you want to do with it, how you want to approach it, basic English questions. That's always been my kind of way to break down the problem. And then once you have that, then you can use, whatever, Excel sheets, Power BI, Python, depending on what strength you have or what you are familiar with, you can present the data in whatever form you want. So that's my quick advice.
I love that. Sophie, would you like to add anything?
Sure. I mean, I think you really said it all. That was a great answer. I guess going off of what you said about think of who you're doing it for, I think something that's so important with my work is listening to these firsthand stories from people who are experiencing harassment and being able to use that as motivation. So yeah, really thinking about who are the people behind the numbers is, I think, really helpful.
Thank you. Thank you. Would anyone from the participants or Andrea or Suzanne would like to ask any questions?
So I'll chime in, and then Tiago, you can go right after me. So Sophie, I just wanted to know, I know you started this some time ago. Tell me about pushback. Have you, in the process of you're doing that, tell me about pushback that you had, because I think that would be good for students to think about their solution and think about that in the context of any pushback.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So we get a ton of pushback. So obviously writing the word for word phrases can be a little bit controversial because some people are upset by the vulgarity. Some people are upset just that we're writing in chalk on the sidewalk in general. So a lot of people have tried to wash away our chalk. Some people say that it's not appropriate for children. And these comments are always really interesting to me because a lot of the submissions we get are from really, really young girls specifically who are facing harassment in the streets. So I think that the pushback is actually a great opportunity for them to learn more and to actually push back against the pushback and say, you know, this is the reason why we're doing this. This is why it's so necessary. It needs to be bold and we need to be in public space because the problem is so severe. Yeah, so it's interesting to see people react so intensely to the comments, but not necessarily understand why they're reacting so intensely. Yeah.
Thank you. Tiago?
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much, Sophie and Kavita, for sharing your experience. That was very enlightening and really helpful for our project. I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit more on how to fine tune the language once you already have like your public or your target audience. How do you exactly tune this language to have the least amount of pushbacks? Like, I'm not going to approach an older group with a speech with a lot of slangs or words that come from like TikTok or something like that. So how can I find this language and understand and make sure that it's appealing to my group?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think maybe I can share my experiences. And Sophie, great answers. I think you are on social media in terms of, a lot of these kind of provocative sometimes, and sometimes, there's stuff that people wouldn't like, right? So maybe you have a different approach in terms of the answer. Tiago, thanks. That's a great question. I think, one of the key approaches is what is the data telling you, right? And the messaging, right? You want to be very specific about what is the data telling you. So when it is backed by data, right? And also we give credit to the source, right? Lots of times, again, you want to make sure that they are agreeable, right? Whatever is the source. So we want to give credit to what is the source of the data, right? So it could be provocative, it could be, controversial. However, one thing is you want to give credit to the source, right? And back it up with data. And the second thing is you want to maybe even share it with a safe group, right? To get the feedback upfront and see, what is the feedback. And I think that always works because you will get really different perspectives in terms of maybe it is the topic, right? And sometimes you want to share it with an audience that is not as close to the data as you are, because, that also puts in some level of bias that so you want to keep it neutral, right? And there are places where you want to keep it, more, I would say, real, right? Where you are looking for a very strong call to action, and your message has to speak that, right? So depending on what is your core mission, what is your message, you want to try these different approaches. Yeah. Hopefully that answered, Tiago. Great question.
Thank you. I'll let Gracie, and then I have a question in the chat. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. Thank you both. That was so wonderful to hear from you both. And Sophie, I followed Cat Calls of NYC for so long, so it's like wonderful to get to talk to you. I guess my question kind of stems from the observation that there's like a level of kind of separation, because like sometimes in instances of harassment, like you don't feel safe, like speaking back to the person that said it, or like looking around at people that observed it and being like, do you really think that this is okay? And so like you've found a way to kind of remove that, like, I guess, like what is the degree, like how do you find a solution that has that level of separation but also is close enough to the problem that you're getting people's attention? And I guess what I'm asking is, like, you have a lot of traction now, so I think that would probably be easier, but when you were first starting out, like what did that process look like? What did your thought process look like? All of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's an awesome question. And I wish I I wish I could know more also about what you're thinking for your project to give better advice. But yeah, in terms of like when I was starting out, what I was first thinking was that it would be difficult in terms of the separation. It's really difficult to respond in the moment. I think for anyone facing harassment or who feels unsafe in public space, it's hard to respond in that moment. And that's why bystanders and bigger solutions are so important. So I didn't think that I could turn around and say, hey, stop catcalling me to a catcaller. So using the chalk allowed me to do something I knew how to do. I'd like chalked in the past on the streets, go with friends, be supported, maybe like have events where there were lots of people around, go during the daytime. So there were all sorts of factors that allowed me to feel safer chalking. And obviously, it also depends a lot on who's doing the chalking, where the chalking is happening. Those are all considerations in terms of the actions that you're taking. But yeah, I think that separation is really important in terms of the time where it happens, giving some space to then react after the fact. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. Yeah, great question.
There's one more thing I wanted to add to what Sophie said, and I think it's so real what Sophie shares in terms of, like, you know, having that separation. One of the challenges that we have always faced when it comes to like really personal data, right? We want to make sure that it is the privacy of people is really maintained, right? So one of the ways in which we tackle this is by segmenting, right? The concept and the notion of segmenting aggregates a particular theme, right? So let's say if we are talking about harassment in, you know, suburbs, right? Or something very controversial, instead of showing like, you know, data that is pertaining to individuals, we want to aggregate it, segment it to a particular, you know, theme. So that way you are protecting the privacy of the people, right? And also ensuring that we are not kind of crossing that line, right? So take that segmentation as one of the key themes when we are trying to depict patterns, right? Or themes. That way you are separating, but as at the same time, you are representing insights in terms of where the problem is. And also subsequently, you know, you can take action or call or suggest a call to action. Right? Sorry about that phone ring in the background. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm just in awe with all the responses. I'm loving it so much. Unfortunately, we don't have so much more time, but I wish we had like a 3-hour Q&A because I'm just so interested in everything that you guys are saying. But we do have a question in the chat. And it says, love the educational aspect of this art. We talked last week about how the education piece on harassment is needed in our communities. The art is in everyday places where people will read it and are even forced to witness this harassment / statements to made it to people. what are other ways to be heard by people who are not necessarily open to be educated about this subject, slash people that don't see this as being a problem?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that art is a good method to engage people, or even like visuals with data, I imagine, is a great way to engage people who might not be willing to just listen to someone's story, or who might originally hear about harassment and not think it's a problem. I do think something like chalk or a mural or something that's public and colorful is a great method to engage a wider audience. So something that's visual, colorful, and artistic, I really do feel like can open up the discussion in meaningful ways.
I agree with Sophie. I think the power, I'm a very visual person myself. So anything powerful, maybe it's just a picture, right? It's just colorful picture, or maybe it's just one line message. So I think that also empowers and is very powerful when it comes to just educating someone, right? Part of what Sophie presented in those pictures where, it was chalk, it was color, it was, statements, right? Very simple. And it doesn't have to be like a whole data Excel sheet, sometimes, it's just as simple as that. So think simple, don't try to complicate, your message, because then the message is lost. Keep it simple and keep it, as visual as possible. So that catches attention.
Yeah, that's a great point. Also, just quickly going off of that, I think especially for people who don't agree, and kind of going back to Tiago's question too about like who you're talking to, I feel like people who don't agree would be less likely to take time to read a full story or look at something complicated. So yeah, exactly. Like you said, just keeping it simple and straightforward is really important.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I just wanted to open the floor. Is there any last questions from anyone? No? All right, then I'll thank you both so much for being here. And I would also like to take the time that we have left to also invite, if you are available, to come to our next session next week, because they will all be presenting their final projects and their solutions. So I would love to have you here and listen to the amazing projects that they're gonna come up with. So yeah, thank you again so much for being here tonight and taking the time.
We would love to. Thank you, Camilla, and wish you all the very best, and looking forward to your final presentation. Sophie, it was great to meet you. Thank you.
It was great to meet you too, Kavita, and thank you, Camilla, and all of the participants too.
Thank you. Thank you both so much.
I think we should give them a round of applause
Yes.
from the thumbs up. All you guys that have your cameras on. Yes, it was amazing. Thank you so much.
Take
Thank
care,
you.
everyone.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
so much. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. All right. So thank you guys so much for your participation. And now we're moving on to the next part, and we're gonna still talk a little bit about solutions, but we're gonna focus more on based on what you just heard, and from those amazing questions that you guys had. Thank you so much for all of them. We're gonna be talking about some really important points that we want you to think about in your solution. And then after we do this presentation, we're gonna be dividing you guys, sending you into your groups so you can talk about your solutions for a little bit. So Andrea, would you like to share your screen?
I can, if I can see it again. Let's see, where did it go? That's not it. Okay, I don't know where it is. Okay, let me just find it again. After all of that, after all of it being right here where I could get to it. Let's see where it is.
No worries.
Let's see. Oh, I know why it's gone. Okay, let me just go back and get it.
Okay.
There it is. Okay, now I can do it. Okay. Okay.
All right.
Okay, here we go.
Okay, so let's talk about fine-tuning your solutions. So basically, last week, you guys talked about the problem, right? So like you talked about the issues involving the data that you were looking at, and then you talked about specific locations. And now we're talking about solutions. So Kavita did a really good job on explaining, just how to do the storytelling behind it. And then one thing that I really liked that they talked about was that idea of thinking about who you're doing it for. And that's what we want to focus here on this quick presentation. So yeah. So what for us, and then for me personally, and if you'd like to add anything else, please feel free to put it in the chat. A strong solution is composed of 4 very specific things. It is consumer oriented. In our cases, it's local community or community oriented. It's simple. Your solution does not need to reinvent the wheel. It's market validated and it's very focused. And we're gonna go into each one of them. So the first one is your solution is consumer oriented. So think about what Kavita said. Who are you doing this for? Think about who's your solution for in the end. It might be the same demographic as you, or it might be someone completely different. But before you actually putting your solution to practice, you need to think about who am I doing this for? And a good way of doing that is by designing a persona. And then in our case, it's a persona with real gender-based violence needs. So by definition, a persona is this fictional character that we create to put all the characteristics together of our key target audience. So for example, instead of looking at a group of thousands of people from Lower Manhattan or thousands of students at LIU or at UDC, we compile the biggest characteristics of these groups and put it into one persona. And then that persona is going to be basically, it's going to make it easier for you to understand how to approach that person, how to communicate with them. So yeah, that's a real first thing that we need to do is think about who we're doing this for. And then on the next slide, I'm going to let Andrea talk about it, but here we have an example of the Red Dot Foundation global persona. So Andrea.
So great. And so this is a very interesting persona because it was developed because we have a lot of data about different folks who participate on the Safe City and Red Dot web platform. And so what we know about this persona that's created is this person's 22 years old. She identifies with she, her pronouns. She has a bachelor's degree. She's active on social media. There's certain behaviors that we know about her. She commutes to work every day on public transit. There's some motivations that we know about her because of her interaction on the platform. We also know some other things about her that you might not know about the folks that you are going to be the persona that you're designing, because we know that this person has some pain points because we know she's been a victim of sexual harassment. We know that she doesn't want to report to the police. You may not have all that information in the persona that you're developing, but wanted to give you an example and an idea of a persona so that you could see, how well developed these things are when you're looking for solutions. One of the interesting things that we know is that she does engage on social media. But what if you were observing some folks that you wrote down some data for that's in the app? You might not be able to know what the person's pain points are. But what kinds of things do you think you could know about what you observed? So just think, and maybe somebody can give me an idea of what you might observe. And let me give you an example. So if you observe somebody on their cell phone, on their mobile phone, and they were interacting on their mobile phone, maybe you could say that that persona has some facility with the use of data or the use of technology. Whereas you wouldn't be able to say that if you were sitting there looking at an older person who has a cane, who's sitting on a bench, who is not using that. So that's an example of how you would develop a persona based upon the data that you're looking at. We're not expecting that you would have an extremely well-developed persona like this one, but you can look at behaviors that you've seen. You can look at interactions that you've seen. You can look and see, you're probably not going to be able to determine motivation, but in the data that you collected, there was gender and there was information about age. And so you may be able to use some of that to develop a persona that you're going to use that will make sense. Camilla?
Yeah. So based on what you just heard, so think about, your consumer, your Joanna in our case. So think about what they want, and then think to yourself and as a group, what's the simplest way to achieve it, So one example that I wanted to give is, for example, let's say that we're dealing with trash and single-use plastics. And then the community complains, or your consumer complains, that there's trash in the street. And then you think of, whoa, what could I do about that? Oh, maybe I'll start just like to have big groups of like 20 people, and I'll gather everyone, and we're gonna do like cleanups, and then the street's gonna be super clean. But that requires so much time, and getting people to come, that can be hard. And a way to solve this problem might be to hang posters inside the buildings with the schedules of the garbage trucks, and that might influence people to leave the trash out when the garbage trucks are coming, and that might make the streets cleaner, but in a easier way. So think about what's the simplest way to achieve the solutions or the wants of your consumer. Also think about if your solution is being efficient or if it's being effective. Also on the single-use plastic example, for example, let's say that we're trying to avoid people from using plastic bags on the supermarket, right? Or plastic water bottles. And then one group comes up with a program where every time you use a single-use plastic bottle and then you recycle it, you get $1. And then another group starts a campaign for supermarkets to start giving out plastic bags. So which of these solutions are efficient and which one is effective? So the first one with the plastic water bottles, that might be efficient, but it's not really effective, because by influencing people to recycle the bottles that they use, and every time that they recycle, they get $1, that influences them to buy more plastic. But by influencing the supermarket to stop using plastic bags, then by the end of the month or the year, you might have paper bags, and that's more effective on eliminating single-use plastic, for example. So just ask yourself, how does your solution change the game? Instead of just getting into that cycle of being in the same, trying to just put a Band-Aid on the problem, just how do you actually mend the problem? How do you end that problem? So think about that as well, but try to do it in a simple way. I know it can be hard, but yeah, it's just thinking about your solution in a simple and effective way.
So the next idea, and I think Kavita talked about this as well, once you select a solution, you need to know whether it meets the needs of your customer. And when your solution meets the needs of your customer, then your solution is market validated. And the notion of market validation is you come up with a solution, but then you need to talk to your customer to see whether the solution makes sense. And so how would you do that? How would you talk to your customer to see if the solution makes sense? And you have to forgive my dog because my dog is drinking water. So if you can hear that, forgive me. I'm actually going to turn it over to Camilla because you're going to give us that example about the Instagram.
Yeah. So just thinking about how could you approach your customer? How could you approach your Joanna, in our case, your persona? You could do it through surveys, you could do it through interviews. And here we're not asking you to survey the whole LIU region or the whole DC or UDC area, or for the group that's doing countrywide, we don't want you to survey people from all over the United States, right? If you could get a small sample and then just ask maybe 5 to 10 people, what do you think about this? And if they say, oh, I think that's cool, I think that I would use that. Or maybe, nah, I don't think I would use that. I don't know if I feel comfortable. Then that's also something valid, right? And what are some ways that you could do this? You could do a Google form and then you can send that to all of your classmates, for example. But another way of doing it, if you're comfortable, and then if you have a social media presence, if you're comfortable on social media, you could do Instagram stories. And then you could ask people, you could poll people on Instagram, and then just maybe just have like 2 stories saying like, hey, have you experienced this? Yes or no. And how would that make you feel? This. And then another one saying, would you use something like that? Yes. And then maybe just DM that person and say, hey, would you tell me why you said yes? Would you tell me why you said no? And then you have your validation right there. So it's not supposed to be something, oh my God, I have to validate it with 50 people. But maybe if you could get 10 responses on a Google form or 10 people to just vote on your story, that's perfect. And that way you know that your solution really works for your own customer. Yeah.
And I would say that if you have some friends, you can also interview them. And because it doesn't take that long, you can say, hey, I did a data challenge and this is the solution we came up with, and it's for this particular group of people. Do you think that's a valid solution? And tell me why. And that's just a question you can ask and get some feedback from them. And what you're going to do with that is you're going to say, hey, this solution is valid because I've tested it a bit and people seem to agree that it's a good idea. We're not asking for you to do a statistical analysis, just ask enough questions for you to feel like, yeah, I'm on the right track. This is a good idea.
Yeah. And I think I just right before we move on to being focused, I think that's also one thing that's really important to say is sometimes we think that something is so incredible and that everyone would use it, but maybe that's a problem just for you, So for example, one thing that is a problem for me, and now it's starting spring, is the amount of mosquitoes at night that keep buzzing in my ear, right? And then maybe my solution for that would be I would invent headphones that would emit a sound that would pull those mosquitoes away from me. But maybe that's a problem just for me. And then people might just, oh, I don't mind that. So if I don't talk to people and then I just spend money, and in your guys' case, you just spend time doing a presentation on this, in the end, you're just gonna be like, oh, So that was a problem just for me, or I thought it was a problem, but it's not really a problem. So that's why it's important to talk to the people that are actually in the end in a positive scenario would use your solution. Yeah. And then lastly, the last thing is your solution needs to be focused. I know that we're all here, and I think that's something that we all have in common. We want to hug the world and we want to solve all the world's problems, but the world is too big, and I wish it wasn't. But for every global issue, so if we're talking about gender-based violence, gender inequality, there's thousands of smaller problems. So choose one of them. Um, because if you think about gender-based violence, we have domestic violence, we have catcalling, we have groping, we have rape, we have so many different instances that if we try to do something for all of them, it's just gonna get messy and confusing. So focus on one problem, focus on one demographic, one location. And the thing is, the location we already gave you. So you're gonna be focusing on the location of the analysis that you did last week. So group one will be focusing on the LIU in downtown Brooklyn. Second group will be focusing on the rest of Brooklyn. Third group is going to be focusing on upper Manhattan, I believe, and in Queens. So you already have a location that you're focusing on. And then look at the data from that location and say, hey, so in that place, most cases were of catcalling inside the subways. So maybe that's where I need to focus my solution on, something to do inside the subway. And then that's the very specific location. And then you start, okay, so most of them happen in this one specific station, or maybe I'll just focus on one central station. So for let's say that you're doing it at Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn. That's a very specific location with a very specific solution, and that then becomes doable and not a huge project. So, and then to say that also, that one issue might manifest itself in various locations in similar way. So solve for one demographic, one location, one issue, and then you might not even notice, but you'll be solving problems for a bigger demographic, a bigger issue, and bigger locations as well.
And I'll just say for the folks in DC who are looking at the wider location across the country, then maybe the location is not as important, a specific location, but the same types of location might be important. What also may be important is maybe you're going to focus more on a different persona than you are going to be focused on the location. And so look at the data and see what, you know, one of the things that Kavita said is, what is the data telling you? What is it speaking to you? It's got to be telling you something, and pull from that something that the data is speaking to you about, because I think that's where you're going to be, that's where you're going to be successful in picking an issue to solve.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Awesome. So
I think, yeah.
Breakout the next slide is just, so now what? Now you've heard us talking for an hour and 3 minutes, and you must all be very tired of our voices. So now what? Now you're all gonna go into breakout rooms for 10 minutes, and in your Google Drive, you're gonna open the folder for week 3, and then in there you're gonna find a few documents. So you have one that's your week assignment, that as last week, if you completed that sheet as a group, you get the attendance points. You're gonna brainstorm about your solution. Think about what you want to do, who your customer is, who's gonna actually, if you don't want to use the customer language, but who are you trying to impact? Who are you trying to serve with your solution? Remember, this doesn't have to be a for-profit solution. It could be just as Sophie did, art on the street. It could be having, I don't know, art festivals in the street. It could be anything that you want for it to be, but one thing that's really important if you do have a location, I would love for your solution to be focused on that location and not globally. So think about a specific, yeah, as I said, one specific demographic. And for the DC folks that are doing nationwide or a larger area in DC, focus on one thing that's in common for all of that and try to think of a solution. So I'm gonna open up the rooms and I'm gonna go into each room and then see if anyone has any questions. But I'll give you 10 minutes, and then when we come back, I'm gonna ask one representative of each group to share a bit of their solutions with us. All right? Okay, so let me open up the rooms and see you all in 10 minutes.